Now, long before the internet, Gen X had their very own secret network, and it only operated on Saturday mornings. The only membership fee was a bowl of cereal, and our parents were the ones to encourage us to join. We called it Saturday morning cartoons. But looking back, it wasn't just a block of television. It was the unpaid babysitter that shaped an entire generation. And here's the thing, those cartoons and the way we had to watch them actually taught us the skills that modern life is taking away from us today. From resourcefulness to radical independence, we weren't just watching TV. We were getting an education that you can't find on a streaming app. It was a beautiful snapshot in time. And of course, I might be biased. But let's look at what we actually learned while we were waiting for the Smurfs to outsmart Gargamel. And number one, the waiting was part of the magic. You waited all week for Saturday mornings. There was no pulling up another episode of the Smurfs whenever you felt like it. You had to be in front of the television when it aired. And if you overslept, well, you missed it for the entire week. There was no rewinding or recording it. VCRs weren't mainstream in homes until the mid to late 80s. And even the public service announcements, they made an impact on us. I hanker for a hunk of cheese, a slab or slice, a chunk of. I hanker for a hunk of cheese. That is burned into my memory. And the waiting wasn't separate from the experience. The waiting was what made the experience feel so special. The anticipation, it was magical. We didn't have everything whenever we wanted it. And that may be why it meant so much to us when we did finally get it. Number two, nobody had to entertain us. I mean, Saturday morning cartoons were the closest thing that Gen X parents had to free childcare. Mom and Dad could sleep a little longer, maybe get a few things done around the house, or drink a cup of coffee in peace. And meanwhile, we were handling things ourselves. We poured the cereal, we knew the channel, everyone knew their own seating hierarchy. Sometimes an antenna adjustment was needed. We'd tell the youngest sibling to get up and change a channel. Now, we didn't expect or even want a moral lesson in each and every episode, but most of the time, we got one anyway. Nobody sat beside us telling us that Wile E. Coyote's plan was unsafe. And by the way, I'm convinced that Acme was a precursor to Amazon. Yeah, we followed the story. We survived the commercials. We actually probably enjoyed most of them since they were targeted right at us. And we settled our own arguments. And we tried not to create a ruckus. We didn't want parental intervention. Adults were not wanted in this club. And before we were old enough to drive, Saturday mornings had already taught us how to run our own shift. And running our own multi-hour Saturday shift gave us and taught us an independence that's really hard to find today. And it's exactly why we're the generation that just gets it done. Number three, the television had limits. When the cartoons ended at noon at my house, then you had to go do a few chores. The bed had to be made. And let's be honest, it was the fastest bed making in history, because the backyard was calling. And tidying up the room meant sliding as much as you could under the bed. And then we were free. We went outside. We used our imagination to build things, to reconstruct the things that we just spent hours watching. A bicycle became a spaceship. The backyard became the Hall of Justice. We organized our comic books. Again, we made homemade bicycle ramps, sliding down big hills with whatever we could find to sit on. Big wheels pulling the red wagon behind it, trying to get the family cat to stay in it without jumping out. Looney Tunes, they gave us so many great ideas. The television, it gave us the characters, but we built the rest of the world ourselves. Today, the cartoons and the entertainment, they don't have a stopping point. There is no noon on Saturday. One episode just rolls into the next and the supply never runs out. So instead of getting that release back into the real world like we did, kids today, they don't get the opportunity to use their imaginations the way we used ours. And I am certain that much of our generation's resourcefulness and craftiness, our DIY skills, etc., all came from that. The moment when the cartoons ended, the television went quiet, and childhood had to continue without it. But we weren't just building these worlds alone in our backyards. All Gen X kids, in a way, we were building them together because we were all watching the same exact things. Okay, number 4 is we all lived in the same world. Saturday morning cartoons gave Gen X a common language. Even 50 years later, we can mention, Bugs Bunny taking a wrong turn at Albuquerque, and we all remember that. You knew that a dog could make a very acceptable superhero. You knew that the Wonder Twins were about to activate. And even if you thought that Aquaman was the least useful of the Super Friends, you still knew who he was. We imitate the voices. We repeat the jokes. Today, children have thousands of shows, channels, creators available at every moment. So even 2 children can be sitting beside each other and be experiencing 2 completely separate cultural worlds. But we didn't. We had fewer choices. But those fewer choices gave us more things in common. Just take one look at a Gen Xer today, and you know exactly how they spent their Saturday mornings. Number 5, it took almost nothing to make us happy. Saturday morning happiness was surprisingly cheap. A bowl of cereal. Maybe you ate the honeycombs straight out of the box, like me. Pajamas that you may or may not have changed out of by lunchtime. Me and my sister, we often wore nightgowns. And I remember on those cold, mornings, sitting in the chair, pulling the nightgown over my legs, trying to get warm. And still be completely content for hours. Not just content, but just kind of mildly excited the whole time. And somehow that felt like a luxury. We weren't wondering, what else was available. We weren't, scrolling through hundreds of choices. There wasn't somewhere else that we'd rather be. We were happy with what was on. Looking back, it may have been teaching us, how to recognize when we have enough. And that was truly a magical time. Now, Gen X isn't pretending that our childhoods were perfect, but maybe we could recreate what Saturday mornings represented. Something to anticipate instead of consuming immediately. Adding a small weekly ritual. Spending time with something that everyone in the household can enjoy together. And this one's big. Knowing when to turn the screen off. And maybe Saturday morning cartoons didn't raise us entirely, but for a few hours every week, they taught us how to wait, how to imagine, how to belong, and how to be ridiculously happy with very little. And that was a pretty good education for the price of a bowl of cereal. Now, by the way, tell me in the comments, what was your favorite cereal as a kid? Also, tell me, what was your favorite cartoon? Now, as for cereal, I already mentioned one of mine, Honeycombs, but Tony the Tiger, he has a special place in my heart as well. And as for cartoons, no contest. For me, it was definitely Looney Tunes. And my very favorite one was Bugs Bunny and the bull, where Bugs Bunny plays as a matador and the bull is very irritable. I'm going to put a link to that cartoon as a pinned comment. And do me a favor, look up one of your all-time favorite cartoons that you can remember watching as a kid. I bet it's on YouTube. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Carrots are divine. You get a dozen for a dime. It's magic. That's a wrap. Let's go with that.